Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 31st week of 2016. I'm Carl Estabrook. Since the summer of 1990, this program has been a weekly hour of spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media, first on a so-called community radio station, and now via Urbana Public Television and YouTube. Our program's name, News from Neptune, comes from Noam Chomsky, who's been writing sensible things about U.S. politics for more than half a century. Chomsky says that in the U.S. media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and you'll sound like you're coming from Neptune. Tonight, Karen Aram, David Green, and I will try to say some true things. It's August 5th, in a week in which Obama killed more people in Libya and Syria, and Clinton promised to overthrow the legitimate government of Syria, as she overthrew the legitimate government of Libya. She probably knows how to find the jihadist she sponsored who raped and murdered the Libyan leader Gaddafi. Obama and Clinton showed us again what we'll get if they beat back the popular movement that animated the Sanders and Trump campaigns, and Clinton becomes president. I'll begin tonight with a piece written by Jeffrey Sinclair in the current issue of the Counterpunch magazine, a piece called Bernie's Last Tape, a mordant requiem for the Bernie Sanders campaign. The piece is written as an homage to Samuel Beckett's famous one-man play from 1960, Krapp's Last Tape, in which an old man reflects on his life with the aid of a tape recorder. I was particularly drawn to Jeffrey Sinclair's excellent satire of the Sanders campaign because I had the honor several years ago to appear in an inventive production of Krapp's Last Tape, directed by Christina Stanley. So, Bernie's Last Tape. Beach, Lafayette Park, winter. An old man in a sleeping bag, fiddling with a vintage cassette recorder. A pigeon alights on his shoulder. Poops. It is a sign. The man speaks. Did they cheer me once? Did they? So hard to tell. The echoes are dim now, fading. People pass by and give me looks. Someone pitches a quarter and a couple of pennies. 27 cents. It was dollars once, wasn't it? Don't they know me now? Hearing is gone. Gone since the batteries died. Jane used to buy them. Costco, wasn't it? Not Walmart. Never Walmart. I could never put them in. Big fat fingers, tiny little hearing machine. She had such nice hands, Jane. Small, delicate, good for that kind of stuff. Hearing is the first to go, of the senses. Warned me once, those cheers, on a cold night in Des Moines, corn stubble covered with snow. I could have won Iowa, they told me. Someone did, later. Who, I don't know. Memory fades. Something about missing ballots. Coin tosses. I should have objected. Too late. Didn't want to make a fuss. They pulled the same trick time after time. Nevada, Missouri, Arizona. Of course they did. But I did better than I hoped. Hope is what kills you, in the end. At the beginning, there was no hope. I was free then, free to say what I wanted. Crazy old man yelling at the banks. That's what they said, some of them, I think. I could say what they couldn't, what they thought. That's why they came, maybe, to hear the crazy old man speak their thoughts. And people came out of nowhere. Madison, Portland, where that other bird landed. Propitious sparrow bird. He turns to the pigeon. He didn't poop on me, not on TV, not like you. Berkeley, Boulder, masses of people, young ones, young women, younger than Jane, whiter than Jane, most of them. my flock. All I had to do was whistle. They would assemble. Eager faces, eager to please, eager for revolt. Even that Rachel at MSDNC, she used to call every week. Seemed to like me. Once. Later they turned on me, like that Warren woman. Just when I was closing in, the knives came out, didn't they? So hard to recall. He pauses, wipes away a tear, or perhaps a flake of snow. It was the blacks who did me in, the blacks who never got me, the blacks who didn't vote. Why did they go for her after all I did for them? Getting arrested in Chicago, marching with Dr. King. It was Dr. King, wasn't it? One of them. Wasn't there a photo? The only time they came to my rallies was to interrupt me, heckle me, to make demands. From me, of all people. So ungrateful. Black Lives Matter, of course they do. But that gives them a right. Yes, I voted for the crime bill. But I didn't call them super predators, did I? Rude, unyielding. Never built a movement like that. I tried to tell them. Ours was the real revolution that would carry them, too, eventually. Patience. They wouldn't listen. Not like my Sandinistas. Someone dubbed them that. The kids who came running when I called. Was it all a joke? He pauses, closes his eyes, broods. Ah, youth, you were my nectar. Then came hope. Bitter, bitter hope. That woman, the other. The woman with the pantsuits, the Armani jackets, and the super PAC. She seemed invincible. Super delegate woman. I showed her, didn't I? At the beginning. My instincts. I should have trusted them. Base old instincts, not the advisors. Where did they come from? The advisors? Who sent them? That first night, under the lights, with the cameras rolling, funny little Chafee down at the end. Had he been smoking weed? That's what somebody whispered. I didn't smell it on him. Perhaps he vaped. I miss him now. Silly little Lincoln. Town car, we called him. Old family, small state, spoke his mind. Not much on it, but still. He pauses, rummages in a garbage bag, pulls out frayed photo of the old man hugging Hillary. Look at us. It all tumbles back now. I had my chance. I could have taken her that night, fatal night. I could have gone for the throat, tiny little throat, right for the slashing. The question hangs before me even now. CNN, that Anderson Cooper, TV trickster. Why did I say it? It was scripted, wasn't it? By whom? The question and the answer. We knew it was coming. The one about the emails. They were her weakness. Stupid little email, stupid little answer. Jane didn't like her, never did. Go for the throat, Bernie, she said. Take her down. Take them all down, Bernie, Jane said. Where is she now? Jane, with that Chafee? She saw something in me once. What was it? Be above the fray, the advisor said. Don't go negative. Preserve your image. Be chivalrous. So I intervened, came to her rescue, made my pact, now can't turn back. The American people are sick of hearing about her damn emails. And the press loved it. I was the white knight. It was over then. I didn't know it. Hillary did. She knew, damn it. That smirk. Walking dead. That's what Jane said. You blew it, Bernie. But the polls. I could have won. There's the cold comfort. They can't take that away from me. The polls, the convention speech, and the money. $220 million. Where did it all go? The advisors? If I only could have it all back. The fire. The children. Hope. I could go on. No. Better this way. Better not to go on. Better not to hope. The old man hangs his head. The pigeon takes flight. The tape records only silence. That's Jeffrey Sinclair's Requiem for the Bernie Sanders campaign, entitled Bernie's Last Tape. A brilliant parody of Samuel Beckett's play Krapp's Last Tape. To conclude that, I'm going to remark here that Jeffrey, the author of that piece, made in his live blogging of the Democratic National Convention, and when he published the collection of comments together on Counterpunch, he began by saying, "First things first, I want to apologize to the Sandinistas for any impolite things I may have written about you in the past 10 months. I especially want to apologize to those of you who rose up after your leader abandoned you, after Bernie wiped out your votes and muted your voices, after he turned you over to the DNC's thuggish floor managers and security guards, after he sat passively as your brave chants of no more drones were drowned out by the fascist war cry of USA, USA. I want to apologize for doubting your resolve. I want to apologize without qualification. You didn't cry when Bernie betrayed you, not for long. You marched right back into the Wells Fargo Center intent on spoiling the party. You didn't sour on your ideals. You refused to be domesticated. You peed on their carpet. You shouted down their war criminals. You made this squalid affair fun for a few precious hours, and that ain't bad." Somewhere, Abby Hoffman is cracking a smile. That's Jeffrey Sinclair with his apologies to the Sandinistas and his devastating riposte to Bernie Sanders himself. You're listening to News from Neptune, and we will go to David Green, I think.
Yes, I think. I'm going to be talking about some more prosaic issues, but of great concern, and that is basically money. And I've spoken and referred to many times in the past 2 or 3 years on this program, I think, about modern monetary theory and how I feel like it's one piece of the puzzle towards people understanding how our system works and how it can be changed. It's not the end-all and be-all. It's not a panacea. But understanding where money comes from and what we can actually do with money if the people control the money has really, I think, in these years that I've read more about it. I don't know whether all this was going on before I got clued into it, but I see more and more about it, including on websites like Counterpunch, and also on a website that we don't often mention here, Naked Capitalism, which I think is the best repository of innovative economic thinking, innovative and enlightened and leftist economic thinking, in one place on one website that you can find, and especially because I think not only because the articles are culled from a broad range of sources, but because the commenters, if you read down, if you have the time, in some instances to read down the page, you'll find really good comments by people that really makes me feel like there's a lot of people out there who know what's going on and who have a lot of insight into the ruse that is capitalism, the ruse that is neoliberal capitalism. So the main points about modern monetary theory, I think perhaps the most fundamental point, or maybe two of them, is that money is made out of thin air, one way or the other, by the Federal Reserve, which has been given the power by the government, which has been given the power by the people to create this money, which is referred to as credit money. That doesn't encompass all money, but most money is born as credit money. When you make a loan to buy a car and that $20,000 appears, or $50,000 or whatever it is, appears in your account or is paid to the auto company, however all that works, that money didn't exist anywhere. The bank was given the right by the Federal Reserve to bring that money into being, and then as that debt is paid off, then that money goes out of being. So, and then what's left, of course, is the interest on that the bank gets, the various fees and the various aspects by which the financial industry profits from that. That might be all well and good if people had solid and secure jobs that paid well and that allowed them to go into debt knowing that they would be able to get out of debt. In fact, that's pretty much how this country ran from World War II until 1970. But in the neoliberal era, it's been different. The way money has been used in financialized capitalism both at the household level, at the business level, and at the banking level, has become very different. And so we can talk about this financialized economy. We could talk about a much larger financial sector, and we could talk about how the rest of the economy, the real economy, in which real goods and services are produced by people doing labor, that has been placed in a very different context in the last 40 years or so. What the modern monetary theorists stress in terms of of money, besides the fact that it comes out of thin air, is that spending through essentially this government source or this government empowered source comes before taxes. And the reason that's so important to understand, and the reason why it's so frustrating for those of us, those people who I think well understand these things, is that the question always comes, especially at the national level, where the federal government has the power to bring money into being and spend it for very different ways than it is often spent. What's frustrating about that is that people are always asking the question, how are you going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? When Bernie Sanders proposes the program, or Jill Stein, or anyone else, how are you going to pay for it? And the most fundamental thing to begin to understand is that nothing needs to be paid for through taxes. Anything and everything in essence is paid through because the government at some point created the money to pay for it. It's a different question at the state level because the state can't print its own money, but the federal government can. And when you begin to look at the question that way, we begin to understand that while the federal government just can't create money to solve our problems, it can create money, but not simply as it pleases. And the questions that go beyond that are, if the federal government were to create the money to, say, employ people in healthcare, housing, education, and so forth, where does that money go, and how is that money spent? And the question becomes, when people are paid that money and they go to the store, will they be able to buy the goods and purchase the services that they want to get with that money? The concern, of course, is always the devaluation of the currency, where if the government were to put into the economy lots more money into the hands, whether directly into the hands of people or through jobs, whether the private sector could respond by producing the goods and services in a way that would not devalue the currency, or in a manner in which inflation would be relatively moderate, as it was from World War II into the 1970s, and as it has been from the 1980s ever since. So the next question to ask in terms of how people spend that money, whether they get it through work or just through a stipend, would be whether that money is going to be flying out of whether it's going to be paid to workers doing work in this country to increase employment in the private sector in this country, or whether it's going to flat out of the country to some other country and cause a balance of payments problem. That is a problem, and that is something that should be answered, and that can be answered, of course, by valuing our own currency in proper relation to other currencies, and making our industry, our productivity, competitive with other countries, valuing it fairly, for better or worse, in terms of what we can afford to buy from other countries and what we can't. So all these questions come to the fore when one talks about modern monetary theory, and when one talks about the questions that really ought to be being asked. And the two articles that I would briefly refer to today were also on Counterpunch, as Carl has just referred to, and they were both published this past Wednesday, August 3rd. They were both published by people with the last name Brown, assumingly unrelated to each other. One is named Ellen Brown, the other named Nathan Brown. And Ellen Brown is a well-known person who's been an advocate for public banking, something that really ought to be being done at the state level, in which the Green Party the Green Party supports. And the title of this article is "Can Jill Carry Bernie's Baton? A Look at the Green Candidate's Radical Funding Solution." And of course, what Jill Stein has been wisely and radically calling for is a cancellation of student debt. Again, the government, the Treasury, through the Federal Reserve, can simply order the Federal Reserve to cancel student debt. It's perhaps complicated how this is done, but this can actually happen, and people should believe and understand that it can happen. And what Ellen Brown writes about Jill Stein's approach, briefly, I just took one brief excerpt out of this to give you a flavor for it, is that in our debt finance system, the economy is chronically short of the money needed to support a dynamic, abundant economy. New money needs to be added to the system, and this can be done without inflating prices. If the money goes into creating goods and services rather than speculative asset bubbles, supply and demand will rise together, and prices will remain stable. So that, I think, succinctly summarizes some of the things that I've been saying, and it's very positive. It was a non-positive of the Bernie Sanders campaign that he didn't address these issues, along with many other things that, Carl, you referred to in terms of attacking Hillary Clinton. But I think that was an opportunity for him, even though he had advisors from the modern monetary theory school. I don't think, unless I'm missing something, that he really did a very straightforward job of saying to people, we need to, in a sense, print money to put people to work or to put in people's pockets to get this economy going in the proper way, under the proper circumstances. That doesn't necessarily, that in and of itself will deal with the class relations problem. That won't necessarily deal with the wealth accumulation and wealth inequality problems. But that's a start, and it's pulling away the blinders that our propaganda system, that our financial propaganda system has, which can really be summarized in all the wrong assumptions behind the constant question being asked, how are you going to pay for it? And the other article by this Nathan Brown, who I don't know, is published on the same day, August 3rd. Why Austerity is the title of this. And let me just read a brief excerpt to give you, again, just the flavor of what this argument is and where we can be going with this. Nathan Brown writes, "It is important at this point to acknowledge that the financial sector and the government sector have a power within this framework which is not granted to households and firms. They can both create money. The financial sector does this by lending more than people have saved. The government sector can do this by virtue of owning the printing press. This allows both of these sectors to pump more finance into the real economy than they are collecting, stimulating economic growth. Running government surpluses means that people have to borrow from running government surpluses, meaning balancing the budget and collecting more taxes than is being spent, means that people have to borrow from the financial sector. You do not have to be Adam Smith to see that the self-interest of the financial sector and their networks might be a motivating factor behind the drive for austerity, meaning government austerity, meaning balanced budget or budget surpluses. And then finally, by encouraging government surplus, the financial sector becomes the sole mediator of the economy. It decides how money will be spent, usually by pumping asset prices rather than investment for real production, which would improve people's standard of living, as well as loans for things which were formerly covered by government social spending, such as health care and education. So I would simply conclude by saying that money in a sense, money can be printed by the government to address our fundamental economic and therefore social problems, especially in the areas that ought to be of most public services, meaning healthcare, education, and I would also add housing. We need vast expansions of public spending in all these areas to take the pressure off families and off businesses in order to make and spend money in ways that will actually stimulate the private sector. The limits of these are not only of this spending finally, I would conclude by saying the limits of these are not only in terms of spending, in terms of how much money can be infused into the economy without causing inflation that creates problems of its own, but it's also simply the limits that those of us in the Green Party and on the left talk about, whether it's the environmental limits or the human limit, whether it's the limits of our labor or the limits of our natural resources. All these things have to be taken into account. But as long as the neoliberal capitalists have us buy the whatever in terms of who gets to print, who in a sense gets to print money, there's a bottleneck by which these problems can't be thought about rationally and cannot be solved, and of course cannot be solved at the political level until these understandings enter into the political discourse.
Thank you, David. You're watching News from Neptune, and we'll pivot to Asia with Karen Aram.
Okay, where do I start? I guess I'll start with Asia then. Excuse me. Well, I have some comments to make on what two of you have been talking about, which is very important. Basically, there was an ASEAN meeting a couple weeks ago in Vientiane, the capital of Laos, in respect to, well, it's an ASEAN meeting. ASEAN is the Asia, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which was actually set up by the U.S. back right after World War II, and of course, Secretary Kerry attended. There's always a U.S. representative there to ensure that our interests are abided to. Well, one of those interests was not, and that is that they were pushing for it to go into the record or the communique, the decision made by the Hague UN Law of the Sea against China. And fortunately this time, and I say fortunately because I'm into anti-war. I don't want to see war break out. So anything that I think is going to prevent war, I'm going to support. And namely that is that both Cambodia, who has been a friend of China for a long time, but also now Laos. And if you remember during the Vietnam War, the Pathet Lao, the military of Laos, they were supported by Russia. But now Laos, given that China and Russia are friends, Laos is now moving very close to China. So those two nations were able to represent China in insisting that it not go into the record, given that technically it's illegal, but I won't go into that. So what was decided after that, according to the Wall Street Journal, diplomats in Vientiane, after the meeting, began discussing fundamental changes to the way in which decisions are made. The frustration over the veto is leading to discussion of hitherto taboo ideas about altering ASEAN's rules to allow a break from required consensus and to enable the creation of smaller conditions that would allow an ASEAN majority to move forward on contentious issues. Such a step then could potentially lead to a breakup of the organization along pro-U.S. and pro-China lines. And I think this is just another exercise of the way the U.S. just rewrites the laws. We rewrite the rules when they don't suit us. To me, that's what's critical there. Now, another point, another article I have here, this is by Mike Head and James Cogan. This was written on the 23rd of July. I go back to this because I found it so chilling. This is where the pivot to Asia that the Obama administration has been following is provoked seriously by the CSIS. That's a Washington think tank, and their name is actually the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Okay, and one of their prominent strategic analysts is Anthony Cordesman, and he's actually referred to, and I make this point. He talks about thinking about the unthinkable, which is nuclear war. And he's actually made the statement that, he actually wrote this in 2013 regarding a nuclear war between India and Pakistan. He says that the good news from a ruthlessly realist viewpoint is that such a human tragedy does not necessarily have serious, grand, strategic consequences for other states and might well have benefits. The loss of India and Pakistan might create some short-term economic issues for importers of goods and services. However, the net effect would shift benefits to other suppliers without any clear problems in substitutions or cost. Now, this is the man. He's actually been referred to as Herman Kahn. Herman Kahn was an American strategist in the 60s, okay? And he was a person who made claims that it was possible to survive and win a nuclear war. Now, at that time, Kahn was simply dismissed by many as essentially insane.
He was also very well known.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very well known.
insane, and became one of the inspirations for the Stanley Kubrick character, Dr. Strangelove. So now we've got this guy, Cordesman, replacing Mr. Kane. And people, it's really scary. And I say this because it was only, let's see, how many months ago that the Union of Concerned Scientists, yes, it was in May, the Union of Concerned Scientists, followed by a recent report issued by the Washington-based CSIS with this prominent Mr. Cordesman, they issued a warning. The possibility of nuclear exchange between the U.S. and China is really chilling, and the scientists, concerned scientists, are really worried about potential for nuclear war or just war in general. Now,
And I would say Anthony Cordesman is someone, back when I used to watch Ted Koppel and Nightline in the old days, he was always on that program. He's considered a very respected analyst.
Well, that tells you something
about
corporate
as is Henry
media.
Kissinger, and he
Yeah.
he knows how to talk the talk. I don't know what the walk is, but
Well.
he's mainstream, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up. Well, I don't really know these things, but it isn't that just because he's talking about nuclear war and Donald Trump is asking why we can't drop atom bombs, that doesn't mean that Anthony Cordesman wouldn't end up advising Hillary Clinton.
I want to talk about that comment
Okay.
ascribed to Trump, by the way.
Yeah.
That's,
Okay, let's
Okay,
get back.
you're being,
sorry to
you're
Yeah,
being sneaky,
yeah.
David.
Sorry to interrupt.
But then
me
so am
finish.
I, so we'll let Karen
Yeah,
finish.
Let me
Yeah.
finish, okay.
I'm
my
gonna
point
let
is-
you finish, but-
My point is that this man,
Yeah,
who
go
may,
ahead, finish.
who may appear to be mainstream on mainstream corporate-owned media, is considered as insane as that Kahn guy. And you know, if anybody's ever seen the film Dr. Strangelove, I mean, that is what we're dealing with today because he has so much influence. Now, given the fact that, is it tomorrow that's the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima
Yes.
and
That's right.
Nagasaki?
That's
okay.
right.
Well, you know,
Nagasaki next week, I mean, 6th and 9th.
that's right.
Yes.
Yeah. But tomorrow it's Hiroshima.
Right.
And on the topic, let me get something briefly in here. The AWARE group, anti-war, anti-racism group, of which we are members, will be holding our usually first of the month Saturday demonstration downtown Church and Neal Street at 2 in the afternoon. And for those of you who are interested in joining up with the local Green Party, of which the three of us are also members, we'll be meeting at the Esquire Lounge about 12:30 or 1 o'clock in advance. Now, I just want to mention a book by Noam Chomsky and Lorraine Polk. It came out in 2013. Very small, very easy to read, Nuclear War and Environmental Catastrophe. And reading this is chilling. It really is chilling. And Chomsky has come out and he's made it very clear that the two greatest threats to survival of humanity today is either end nuclear war and global warming, and we're doing nothing about either one. Okay, I have to get one more thing in here, people. I'm sorry, but you know, we're now bombing Libya again, and this is something that was in the planning stage. We're claiming that the government has asked us. I mean, this is the new thing now. Oh, the government asked us to come in and support them against ISIS. The reality is that they have three different governments. One is Tripoli, one is in Benghazi, and one is in Sirte. And the Sirte government is the one that we're bombing because that's the former home of Gaddafi. That's where some of his former supporters have taken hold on. And as has been mentioned, I think it's Phyllis Bennis pointed out that it makes it sound as if we're just going in and we're going to bomb and kill a few hundred ISIS members. No, that's a city, even though it's been destroyed, but it's a city basically of 80,000 people. So there will be a lot of civilians killed. And this was something that we didn't just decide upon, although we did wait until after the Democratic Convention. We started on Monday. This goes back months. We've been planning on this. And we've had boots on the ground, our special forces, the French are there, I think the Italians are there, and the Brits, if I'm not mistaken. So this has all been in the planning stage. War, more war, and continued war. Now, I wanted to comment, Carl, on your reading. I thought that was really beautiful poetry. It captured something that Chris Hedges mentioned about Bernie, how he really feels strongly that Bernie is really going to come to regret his decision not to turn away from the Democratic Party. Jill Stein actually offered Bernie, Jill Stein of the Green Party offered him the first, she would step back and let him take the first place, but he turned it down. And well, this would be after discussion because, like Chris Hedges said, he would not support Bernie based upon his record of support for the wars. And that's an issue on foreign policy that really was rarely discussed by the Bernie Sandinistas. And I want to also mention, it's good that you talk about capital, it's good that you talk about money, because this is something I think so many people we don't understand. And David, I hope that you will continue to enlighten us.
As long as I don't have any money, I'll continue to talk about it.
Yeah, well, that's another thing Chris Hedges pointed out, is that in his debate, it was on Democracy Now!, his debate with
Robert Wright.
Wright, yeah, and it's I thought it was an excellent debate. And he points out that, you can't really talk about democracy elections without facing the fact that the problems we have are related to capital, the total loss, or lack of regulations, and I'll leave it at that and let you to continue.
Thank you very much, Karen. You're watching News from Neptune, where our topics tonight have been votes and money and weapons. And they all tend to turn up together in various interesting ways that it's worthwhile for us to be aware of and talk about, because they are all things about which something must be done. I would mention that I was reminded, as old people often are, of my youth when David was talking about modern monetary theory. Not because I had any direct connection with it, but because I did listen in those days, long ago, to a very interesting economist, the late John Kenneth Galbraith, whose book, The Affluent Society, was published about 1960. It may have been the late 50s, I'm not sure, but was one of the first political and economic tracts that I ever came across, and it was quite influential. I got to know Galbraith slightly a few years later, and found him a very interesting man with a lot of interesting things to say about politics that were really outside the general discussion of American liberal politics in the early 1960s. Galbraith once said, "No one ever turns down a check signed by the U.S. government." And that, in a sense, I think was the point, one of the points, or a terrible simplification of the point that David was making about modern monetary theory and what, in fact, the government could do. So when we hear that we have to restrict entitlements, we can't afford social supports, we can't do any of those things that American liberalism did from the 1930s to the 1970s to try to ameliorate the bad effects of American capitalism. When we hear that you can't possibly do that anymore because you can't afford it, we've already lost the sense that that's a serious argument, because we watched what the U.S. has done, particularly in these last 15 years, in regard to war, without ever worrying about whether we could afford it or not.
And bailouts.
And bailouts, even more so. So on war and the economy, the argument that we can't afford it rings rather hollow with most Americans. They recognize that, in fact, decisions are being made about how that money is being used and where those checks from the U.S. government are being sent, and they're not very happy about it, because for a good part of the American population, the lifestyles and the prospects of a generation ago have been confiscated. And it's that slow and indeed accelerating confiscation that fuels not only the Sanders campaign, but also the Trump campaign. And it's a worldwide phenomenon in some ways as well, because it also fueled the Brexit campaign in the UK. So the notion that what we're dealing with here is a fairly fundamental aspect of contemporary politics, I think is right. And indeed, it seems to me that what the Clinton administration or what the Clinton campaign is doing is working very hard to cover that fact over, to say that instead of talking about what we are actually going to do about war and the economy, we have to think more about what a nasty guy Donald Trump is. That's all they've got in their arsenal in the Clinton campaign right now, because their program in office is to A, increase inequality, and B, increase killing. More war and more austerity is the program that Mrs. Clinton has been given by her masters, the American 1%. That's not a particularly good program to sell to the voters, so they have to sell something else, and what they choose to sell right now is what a wretched person Donald Trump is. It would be much better if we actually went back and talked about the things we do know about modern monetary theory. That is, the ability of the government, in fact, to find the money, spend the money, make the money that we need to do things that really are helpful to the society and to, as Karen points out, to the world at large. That's what we should be doing. Comments, Karen? Oh, sorry, David. Go ahead.
No,
Your
I
turn.
wanted to follow up on that because, of course, John Kenneth Galbraith followed John Maynard Keynes in many of his views, and we had a Keynesian economy. You could call it military Keynesianism, but that's what it was after World War II. And his son, James Galbraith, follows in that path and has also been associated with modern monetary theory and might in fact have even been, I think was an advisor to Bernie Sanders also, along with a couple of the more people that are more familiarly identified with monetary theory, modern monetary theory, a woman named Stephanie Kelton and a man named Randall Wray, R-W-A-Y. And what that caused me to think when you mentioned him, Carl, was that there was a series on public broadcasting, probably back in the 70s, where Galbraith went through some of the historical understandings of various theorists, so that I found informative back then when I knew nothing about economics. But what I came across recently was also a little interesting tidbit about the sort of the transformation of public broadcasting. When someone pointed out that the decision of public broadcasting to give Milton Friedman his own series, his own economic series of something with the word freedom in it, free to choose, free to be you and me. I forget what it was, but
Friedman to choose.
Friedman to choose. It was done by him and his wife,
Yes.
and they marked that as the kind in the 80s when this I think happened. They marked this as the part of the turn of public broadcasting towards this more corporate neoliberal friendly environment. Now I know, Carl, a lot of times you referred to Friedman's and Nixon's support for guaranteed annual income in the late 60s, early 70s, and that has to be looked at somewhat skeptically. And we debate on the left. It's important to add, I think, in terms of what the comments I made before, the debates on the left about guaranteed annual income, meaning just providing money with everyone, as opposed to guaranteed jobs. That's an important debate on the left, and there's something to be said for criticizing some aspects of guaranteed annual income, although I would support that, but probably not without the kind of spending for the kind of jobs, for the kind of public works driven public policy that provides people with what they need in terms of the use values, that gives us our health care and education and housing, with just in terms of the use value of those things, where nobody is profiting from it, where it's provided in terms of public provision. So these are important ways that money can be used, and so and the Friedman approach, I fear the appropriate criticism of that, given that it is Milton Friedman and given that he is a monetary theorist and doesn't really believe in expanding the money supply the way modern monetary theorists, as opposed to monetarists like Milton Friedman, there's some thinking to be done on those accounts. I would just say one more thing. The most fundamental point I think that I failed to make, perhaps I could make, is that as long as there is labor as long as there are people not employed with skills, as long as there are resources to bring to those people, and the technology and the sort of organizational structures, then the money should appear to bring those things together to provide what people want and need. That's the most fundamental thing and the most fundamental myth, again, when people say we can't afford it. It's not that we can't afford the money, it's that is there the labor, are there the resources? And that's what's so stupid about so much of what is said about this.
Stupid is right. One quick comment, and then I want to let Karen get into this. It's finally just a vicious society that has all sorts of people who want to work, are able to work, who have talents and so forth, and a great deal of work to be done, everything from infrastructure to production to teaching to all that work to be done, and it can't put them together because we have a system in which those are put together, those two things are put together, labor and the work that needs to be done, only when it profits the rich, only when someone can be a job creator and get money out of the fact that these two things are conjoined. Now, what in fact other societies, more modern societies, are finding in the 21st century is that people willing to work and work that needed to be done can be put together in ways other than paying off the capitalist. And that is responsible, finally, for what has quite rightly been called the relative decline of the United States, a big topic, and a topic that ties together the things we're talking about tonight, votes, money, and weapons. Karen, you have a comment on this?
Well, I'm guessing when Milton Friedman introduced the concept of, it was meant more as a neoliberal form as welfare, rather than what I think we look at it as something to ensure that everyone is taken care of. We know the potential of jobs is there. We know that our infrastructure is rotting, okay? We know that other nations, especially developing nations, are way ahead of us. I mean, Carl, you know, when you visited and traveled through China, you were amazed at what you saw there. And I'm familiar with having taken their high-speed rails. And even if anywhere you travel,
Yeah, we've got a lot of those in this country, right?
Right. I mean, here, I mean, God.
I took one over here.
Right. I mean,
It was a bike, huh?
Yeah, if you haven't traveled out of the country, you may not be aware that we are so
This is a
far
good point. This
behind.
is a very good point.
But energy, I mean, there are so many things we could do to cut energy and to cut the control and the health degradation for the people by stopping this continual support for fossil fuels and start enforcing the goal of jobs for solar energy, wind energy. There's so much out there. The technology is there. It's being worked upon. There are even my daughter's working on a substitute for diesel fuel. So, you know, there's so much going on, but it's not being utilized because at this point in time, allowing people to just stagnate and be unemployed when they have the skills and keeping the job market is such that people have to work 2 and 3 jobs to survive, and even our minimum wage is so beyond the standards that it should be. So I'm just saying is that...
You mean lower than the standard?
Lower than the standard, I'm sorry, yeah. I mean, one of the things that we have, and I call it neoliberalism, is okay, if you paid into Social Security, you can collect Social Security when you retire, or if you paid into these pensions, as long as we didn't, you know, as long as the government or the private sector hasn't lost it, then you'll collect on your pension. The problem with that is that there are so many people out there that don't come under that umbrella of Social Security or the pensions, and they're just sort of left to flounder. And this is, again, this is the neoliberalism that, okay, well, you can line up, maybe you can apply for some form of benefits. We can look at our healthcare system. So that's all I want to say on that, but I want to turn it to just one thing I just want to point out. Li Feng of The Intercept was interviewed on Democracy Now! Yesterday and today, and he's talking about Citizens United and the corruption of our whole so-called democratic process by foreign money. And while he focused on one nation and one family, he pointed out there's so much we don't know, and we don't take the opportunity to really look into it. And this is what Citizens United was able to accomplish, that foreign nations are now able to intervene. And something today that I think you would enjoy, I have to bring some humor here, U.S. State Department representative or spokesman is Mark Toner. He was seen standing up and saying, oh, well, we have journalists and we have interns in the audience, and so they're going to view an exercise in transparency and democracy, and he just broke up. It's like he couldn't even swallow the words himself. And so they captured him on RT. It'll be going around the internet laughing. And then one of the journalists, I think an RT journalist or an independent journalist, said, oh, I thought it was an exercise in the usual spin and obfuscation. I mean, there it is, people, right there. What the government is delivering to us, the news that they're delivering to us, is so perverted. Even those that are delivering the news sometimes can't swallow it without either getting sick or laughing hysterically. You don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. Well,
I saw it. It's posted, as a matter of fact. I think I posted it to the Aware Facebook page.
Okay. Oh, good, good. Because I think more people need to be aware. There are a lot of people, if they're watching this on TV, that aren't on the internet. And so sometimes these things have to be mentioned for their sake.
You're watching News from Neptune. The Hebrew Bible says at one point, old men see visions, young men dream dreams. Well, since it's clear which of those categories I'm in, I'm going to relate to you a vision that I had this week. It's a fairly low-level vision, and I don't think it needs the authority of the Hebrew Bible.
I'll be the judge of that.
But you can be the judge of that, precisely. My vision was as an outside observer from Mars, because it's hard to get outside observers anyplace else. An outside observer from Mars having trouble understanding why there's such confusion about the U.S. presidential election. One candidate proposes war and the further sellout of the economy to corporations via trade pacts that will increase U.S. inequality at an accelerating rate. The other candidate opposes war and the institutions like NATO that promote it, and the trade pacts, he opposes them too, in order to bring those jobs that the trade pacts have taken abroad home. One candidate asserts identity politics, primarily for the upper 20%. The other candidate asserts a class politics for the 80% who have had their lifestyles and prospects restricted in the last generation. When asking why the choice could possibly be in doubt, given those contrasts, the Martian outside observer is told that it's a matter of personality. Now, comments.
Well, I would simply like to say is that probably because the majority of people over, I think, age 60 maybe, who are not on the internet, they only see one thing of that one candidate, and that's the nonsense and the ridiculous statements he makes. So it's unfortunate that that gives him a lack of credibility when he does say that which really needs to be heard, really needs to be said by more people. And it's really sad. It's
But
really sad.
that's not an accident. I must admit, I
Oh,
have
it's
been,
no accident, right? It's
even
deliberate.
at my great age and seeing visions, I have been amazed at the at mainstream media's hysterical denigration of Donald Trump. I mean, as Bill Blum, the excellent anti-imperialist historian, says, Trump is not a very attractive personality. I wouldn't want to be his friend, but who cares? And I think Blum is absolutely right here. And as I say, even after years of listening to American media tilt matters in favor of the people they work for, I'm actually astonished at what's going on this summer in regard to a candidate who is outside the range of allowable debate. For 40 years, all American presidential candidates have made their obeisance to the principles of neoliberalism and neoconservatism, as we've talked about here. Trump, because he's a crazy man, as more and more articles said this week, isn't doing that. And it's driving mainstream media nuts because it's driving the political class nuts. It's driving the American government nuts.
They would be correct to call him an authoritarian populist. They would be
Right.
correct to call him a xenophobe and a racist and all that. And they would be correct to question him exactly on how he's going to do what he says he's going to do, given that he still wants to raise the military budget and to invade the Middle East even more and build a wall on the Mexican border and all that stuff. So it would be appropriate to ask the same difficult questions to both him and Hillary Clinton in terms of what their plans really are, how they're going to do what they're going to do, and maybe even beyond that to ask, well, how are you going to get the Congress to go along with what you want to do? And Trump certainly is lacking in specific plans for doing what he did. He has his finger on the pulse of the right the let's just say the right wing working class. Maybe that's not fair, but they don't treat Hillary Clinton with equal skepticism and criticism, and of course they don't include Jill Stein and Gary Johnson in that. And in fact, Jill Stein has very good answers to those questions, and Gary Johnson is probably good on foreign policy as a libertarian, but probably has very little to say about how we're going to get the economy going again on libertarian terms.
David, that's a version, I think, of the how are you going to pay for it argument. In this case, metaphorically speaking, to Trump, you say you want to change the war commitments of the country, and you want to change the economic commitments of the country. How are you going to pay for it, at least in the sense of how are you going to make it work? How are you going to get it done? What, in fact, we have here, I think, is a challenge to shibboleths of American policy that have produced the most incredible reaction, including the notion that frequently repeated that Trump is a Manchurian candidate, referring to an old movie and novel in which a drone, forgive the expression in the old sense of the word, is sent into American politics to do the bidding of communist masters and become a principal member of the American political establishment. I haven't heard that since the 50s. Just as I haven't heard the sorts of things about catering to Russia about an American political figure since Joe McCarthy died. I mean, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel here, and it's just incredible. I think what it shows is how frightened the political establishment is of the fact that there is a sizable popular surge behind this man Trump, like there was a popular surge behind Brexit in the vote to leave the EU in Britain, which the establishment thought would never happen. We're in for an interesting ride at the very least. You've been watching news from Neptune.
Let me just say,
Go, sure.
Let me just sneak in one thing. So asking how you're going to pay for it in the context that I was criticizing it before, it's like, there is an answer to how you're going to pay for it. And it isn't always finagling with budget items or how much military spending can you cut, although you should cut military spending, obviously. Things can be paid for in the usual thing, especially at the state level, where things do have to be paid for because the state can't print its own money. But all I'm saying is that it's fair to ask how you're going to pay for it, but part of the answer should be the government prints the money to pay for a lot of the stuff that we need, and Donald Trump could very well be answering the question that way. He won't be. And that's what his limit. That's the limits on his understanding of what really is going on.
You've been watching News from Neptune for the 31st week of 2016, a Bernie's Last Tape edition. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight have been David Green and Kieran Aram. Our thanks to our directors and producers, Jason Liggett and Joseph Cash. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.